All right, so a little bit of a layoff, but we're going to keep finishing up James 1 here, last part, verses 19 through 27. So here they are. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of a man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who intently looks at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks himself and goes away, and at once he forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and preserves, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. If anyone thinks he's religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. I think it's very, very relevant passage, I would say, for me and for many who kind of like, for a long time, you sometimes just go through emotions. You're going through emotions, right? And you hear the word, and it just doesn't really sit, right? You don't really act on it. You just kind of hear it. You move on with your day, and nothing really happens. That can definitely be me. Even in these states, that was definitely me. Before I really, decided to take Christianity seriously. Like I definitely just hear it, and you move on, and there's nothing there, right? There's no depth. Like they said, the man who looks in the mirror, you forget it immediately. You move on. Sundays, watching football or whatever. You just completely forget. But kind of starting from the beginning. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. I think that's very, very important. Just always be quick to having I would say, I don't know if this is exactly was insinuating, but like big emotions, quick listening first, slow to speak, making sure your words are thoughtful and intentful, and slow to anger, because anger can lead to so many things that you do not mean. It can lead to, poor speech and all these other things, and not listening to one another. So really taking time, and just controlling your anger, taking time to think, pray. It continues. It says, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Anytime we are angry and we act in anger, we are not going to be righteous before God. Most times, we're going to be thinking irrationally, emotionally, saying things we probably shouldn't have, and doing things we probably should not have out of that anger. And he's telling us to guard us, and continue. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word. Kind of just a call to receive God's word, and put away the wickedness and the filthiness of this kind of world, and humble yourself to receive the word and be wise in it, which is able to save, and it continues this, which is able to save your souls. So the word is going to save your soul, not the worldly things that he wants you to put away. The wickedness, the filthiness, those things are distracting and temptations from the word that don't allow you to fully digest everything. And it kind of continues, but be doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man who intently looks at his natural face in a mirror. So this is like really big. I think this is really just the biggest part of the passage. Being doers of the word, not hearers. And he says, not hearers only, or hearers only, deceiving yourselves. So like when you're a hearer, you just hear the word, and you're like, I get that. You kind of move on. He's basically saying you're deceiving yourself. You're deceiving that you are actually doing well in your faith. By just doing that. And I can tell you that's where I was. I was like, I'm hearing it. I'm going to church. I'm hearing I read the Bible occasionally. I'm doing these things. That's where I was, and I can also get into these these places sometimes. I'm just like, I just read that. I don't even know what I just read. If I'm doing my quiet time in the morning, I'm like, I read that. I don't even understand what did I just read. Nothing. I just move on past it, and that's not the intent. Of the word. The word is to do, to act in accordance to God, what God is telling us here. And it's so important for that. And it's for if anyone is here and he looks at his face in the mirror, right? If he looks in his face and it goes away once he forgets it. So it's like what I'm saying, like I can do this so often is I hear the message, I hear or I read the message, and I don't process it. I don't process it, and I don't do anything with it, and it just I don't forget it. I forget it immediately, right? I could be at school or wherever at work, 6 hours later, I'm like, I don't even know what I read this morning. I couldn't even tell you the premise or anything. And that's not the goal. That's not the goal. And so I think that there's just so much intentionality of really digesting the word and digesting messages, taking notes, or doing whatever it helps you to really digest the message and then act on the message, which takes a time of self-reflection, right? So once you read, once you listen, you definitely need a period of reflection, where can I apply this in my life? Where do I see this in my life? How can I act upon what God is telling me in this, this passage? It could be about love. It's how can I love others better? How can I do this? How can I love, my friends, my colleagues, work? How can I do that better? From reading this from the passage, rather than just reading it and just be like, oh, that was a good message, and move on, right? You're not really getting the full word there, fully of what God's looking for. Kind of continuing, he forgets what he looks like, and then, but the one who looks into the perfect law of liberty and preserves, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer acts, he will be blessed in his doing. That's just being, if when you are acting in accordance to the word, right, the law of liberty, the perfect law, God is going to bless you in those ways. Maybe hard sometimes, right? Maybe hard, to because you're gonna be convicted. You're gonna be, asked to do things that are out of your comfort zone. For me, kind of evangelism can be very hard for me sometimes. But God calls us to do it in the Great Commandment, so therefore it's something that I'm commanded to do. I'm going to do, and it may be hard, but he's also going to bless you in this way, and you're also blessed, by having going to be able to go to heaven, in that way. So, kind of continue his final thought here. If anyone thinks he's religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Let's actually just stop there. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person, I think this is kind of just, going back to being here, right? Being here, and just having an open tongue, right? It's kind of, not really checking yourself on anything. You're again deceiving your heart, what you're saying does not really align with, the word and other things. What you're doing does not align. And he's kind of saying your religion is worthless. Which, it can be sometimes for people who just have this kind of fundamental base, of God exists, it's what I'll focus on him in 20 years. I'll focus on him when it's convenient for me. There is no religion there. There's no faith. There's no belief there. But then he continues. He says, religion is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. I think it's actually very interesting. It says to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. Out of all, kind of all the things you could say, he chooses this bit. And then it says to keep oneself unstained from the world. I think it's extremely interesting that he chose to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. I think he personally chose this, this specific example because it shows both love and serving. It shows both action, and love of God, to visit orphans and widows, people who are many times neglected, many times can be forgotten about, who can be lonely, who cannot feel loved, by those around them. It's so important that you show action. You do, right? You go and you visit, these people, and you see that, and it holds true today, orphans and widows, but it's also, many people today, it's just, it could be going out to anyone who's in affliction, right? Just going up to people and serving them and loving them in any way. So I think that's kind of why he chose that verse, because it also has an act of doing, but also with God's heart behind that. And then to keep oneself unstained from the world, that's just, trying to refrain from sin and keeping yourself out of worldly passions, out of godly passions. So I really think this verse is, this passage is powerful, and it's just so important to really digest the word, understand the word, ask questions about it, struggle over the word, right? In order that you can act on it, do it, be a doer of the word, taking steps of faith in doing, what God is commanding us, what God is doing, like doing these things rather than just hearing it, kind of just letting it, go. Because I can tell you when my relationship with God is the worst is when I'm just hearing, when I'm just like, don't have time to really think about this. I'm just gonna read it just to, because I need to read it, quiet time or whatever, and I just move on. Like that's when my relationship with God is the worst and the most fragile. When I'm quicker to anger or quicker to say something stupid, right? So I think it's so important, to really just digest word. Take just the extra 5-10 minutes that it really is to digest a message, digest, this in order that you can act on that. Be a light for those around you. So yeah, that's the end of James 1. Moving on to James 2.